I woke up at 3 in the morning with a pain in my chest that felt like someone had driven a knife straight through my sternum and was twisting it slowly, deliberately. The sensation was so overwhelming that for a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except lie there in the darkness of my bedroom, alone in this 8-bedroom mansion in Greenwich, trying to understand what was happening to my body. My left arm had gone completely numb. Cold sweat was pouring down my face, soaking through my silk nightgown. I tried to call out, but there was no one to hear me. Richard had been dead for 3 years. Vanessa lived in London now, or was it Ibiza this month? I could never keep track of where my daughter was, only that she was always somewhere far away, somewhere expensive, somewhere that wasn't here. The pain intensified, radiating down my arm and up into my jaw. I'd built a financial empire from nothing, survived boardrooms full of men who wanted to see me fail, negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars without flinching. But this pain reduced me to something primal and terrified. I knew what this was. My father had died of a heart attack at 62. I was 57. I managed to roll off the bed, my body hitting the plush carpet with a thud that sent another wave of agony through my chest. My phone was on the nightstand. I had to reach it. I actually crawled across my own bedroom floor like an animal, each movement sending fresh spikes of pain through my body. My fingers finally closed around the phone, and I dialed 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? Heart attack, I managed to gasp out. I'm having a heart attack, 57 years old, alone. Eleanor Whitmore, 327 Lakeview Drive, Greenwich. Stay on the line, ma'am. Help is on the way. Try to stay calm and keep breathing. But I couldn't stay on the line. The phone slipped from my fingers as another wave of pain crashed over me, and then there was nothing but darkness. The next thing I remember was voices, bright lights, the wail of sirens that seemed to come from very far away. Paramedics were surrounding me, speaking in urgent tones that I couldn't quite understand. I felt myself being lifted, moved, the night air cold against my sweat-soaked skin as they carried me to the ambulance. Someone was putting an oxygen mask over my face. Someone else was starting an IV in my arm. Massive myocardial infarction, I heard someone say. 95% blockage in the left anterior descending artery. We need to move now. Then I was in the ambulance, the siren screaming as we raced through the empty pre-dawn streets of Greenwich. A paramedic was leaning over me, his face tense with concentration. Stay with us, Eleanor. Stay with us. But I couldn't stay. The darkness was pulling me down, and I let it take me. I don't remember arriving at Yale University Hospital. I don't remember them rushing me into the cardiac unit or Dr. Hassan Mehta, the cardiologist on call that night, making the decision to put me into a medically induced coma while they tried to save my life. I don't remember any of that. What I do remember, what came later, was Marcus telling me everything that happened while I was unconscious, while I was hovering between life and death, while my only child was on another continent making decisions that would change everything between us forever. Dr. Mehta had found my phone in the ambulance, still unlocked from when I'd called 911. He scrolled through my contacts until he found the one labeled Ice Vanessa, in case of emergency, my daughter. He called her at 4:30 in the morning, Greenwich time, which made it 9:30 in the morning in Ibiza, where apparently she was staying at some luxury resort with her boyfriend. Marcus told me later that Dr. Mehta had made 6 attempts to reach Vanessa before she finally answered. 6 calls, each one going to voicemail. When she finally picked up, he could hear loud music in the background, the kind of pulsing electronic beat that you hear at expensive beach clubs where beautiful people drink $1,000 bottles of champagne in the Mediterranean sun. "Is this Vanessa Whitmore?" Dr. Mehta had asked, his voice professionally calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Yeah, who's this? Do you know what time it is?" It was 9:30 in the morning where she was, but apparently that was early for my daughter's lifestyle. Ms. Whitmore, this is Dr. Hassan Mehta from Yale University Hospital. I'm calling about your mother, Eleanor Whitmore. She's been admitted with a massive heart attack. She's in critical condition. There was a pause. Marcus said he could hear Vanessa saying something to someone in the background, laughing. Then the music got quieter, as she apparently moved away from the noise. Okay, so what do you need from me? Dr. Mehta had been doing this job for 15 years. He'd made hundreds of these calls. But Marcus told me that even he was taken aback by the casual tone in Vanessa's voice. Ms. Whitmore, your mother is in a medically induced coma. We had to perform emergency surgery. The next 48 hours are critical. She has less than a 2-hour window right now where things could go either way. I need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible. There are decisions that may need to be made, and you're listed as her next of kin and medical power of attorney. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Vanessa spoke, and the words that came out of her mouth were the ones that would change everything. Look, doctor, I appreciate you calling, but I'm in Europe right now with my boyfriend. We're in the middle of a really important vacation. If she dies, just make sure someone guards the documents for her will and testament. They should be in the safe in her home office. The password is my father's birth date, December 18th, 1962. Is there anything else you need? Dr. Mehta was silent for a long moment. Marcus said he could see the shock on the doctor's face even hours later when he was recounting the conversation. Ms. Whitmore, your mother is dying. She may not survive the next few hours. I understand that, doctor, but like I said, I'm in Europe. Even if I wanted to come, which honestly I'm not sure would help anything, I couldn't get there in time anyway, right? So just, do what you can for her, and someone contact Marcus Aldridge. He's her lawyer. He'll handle everything if she doesn't make it. I really need to get back to my friends now. And she hung up. Dr. Mehta stood there in the ICU corridor, staring at the phone in his hand, trying to process what had just happened. He'd delivered bad news to families thousands of times. He'd seen every possible reaction to the news that a loved one was dying. Hysteria, denial, shock, grief, anger. But never this cold, transactional dismissal. Never a daughter who responded to the news of her mother's imminent death by asking about inheritance documents and then hanging up to get back to her vacation. He did what Vanessa had suggested. He called Marcus Aldridge, whose number he found in my phone contacts. Marcus, bless him, was at the hospital within 45 minutes, despite it being 5 a.m. He found Dr. Mehta in the ICU waiting room, and the doctor, still shaken, told him everything. Told him about the 6 unanswered calls. Told him about Vanessa's response. Told him about the request to guard the will documents and the vacation she couldn't interrupt. Marcus sat down heavily in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs that all hospital waiting rooms seem to have. He'd been my lawyer for 15 years. He'd watched me build my consulting firm from nothing into an empire worth $220 million. He'd handled the sale of that company 5 years ago for $180 million. He'd been there when Richard died in the yachting accident 3 years ago. He'd seen me try repeatedly to build some kind of meaningful relationship with my daughter, only to be rebuffed again and again unless she wanted something, usually money. But even Marcus, who knew Vanessa better than most, was stunned by this. "Did you record the call?" he asked Dr. Mehta quietly. "No, of course not. Patient confidentiality laws wouldn't—" "I'm not talking about recording Eleanor's medical information. I'm talking about recording what her daughter said, because Eleanor needs to know exactly what happened here." Dr. Mehta shook his head slowly. "I didn't record it, but I'll never forget it. Every word is burned into my memory." They sat together in that waiting room for the next 6 hours while I fought for my life in the cardiac ICU. Marcus made calls, canceling my appointments, notifying my board positions, handling the 1,000 practical details that accumulate when someone's life hangs in the balance. But mostly he sat there thinking about what he was going to tell me if I survived. When I survived. Because Marcus had always had faith in me, even when I didn't have faith in myself. The surgery was successful, as far as these things go. They cleared the blockage, inserted 2 stents, and stabilized my heart rhythm. But I remained in the coma. Dr. Mehta said my body needed time to heal, that they'd bring me out of it slowly over the next few days. Marcus stayed. He rearranged his entire schedule, delegated his other cases, and essentially moved into that hospital waiting room. On the second day, he started doing research. He called a private investigator he'd used before, someone discreet and thorough. He asked them to find out everything they could about Dimitri Konstantinos, Vanessa's boyfriend, the man my daughter was with in Ibiza, the man whose vacation was apparently too important to interrupt even for her dying mother. The report came back within 24 hours. Dimitri was 38 years old, from a Greek shipping family that had once been wealthy but had fallen on hard times. He had debts of 2.3 million euros with various investors in Athens. There were questions about some of his business dealings, allegations of fraud that had never quite resulted in charges. And most importantly, he was legally married to a Ukrainian woman named Svetlana in what appeared to be a citizenship scheme. The marriage had taken place in Cyprus 4 years ago and had never been dissolved. Marcus also tracked Vanessa's social media during those 3 days I was unconscious. She posted constantly, pictures of her and Dimitri on a yacht, videos of them at expensive restaurants, stories showing champagne bottles and sunset views and designer shopping bags. Not one word about her mother, not one mention that anything might be wrong. My friends started commenting, asking if I was okay, saying they'd heard I was in the hospital. Vanessa ignored every single comment. On the 3rd day, I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was the white ceiling of the hospital room. The second thing was the medical equipment surrounding me, beeping and humming and keeping track of my continued existence. The third thing was Marcus, sitting in a chair beside my bed, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled from 3 days of sleeping in a hospital, his face lined with exhaustion and something else. Something that looked like anger, which was unusual for Marcus. He was always so controlled. "Eleanor," he said softly when he saw I was awake. "Thank God." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the breathing tube they'd had down it. Marcus held a cup of water with a straw to my lips, and I drank gratefully. "Vanessa," I managed to croak out. "Where's Vanessa?" And that's when Marcus's expression changed. That's when I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before in all our years of working together. It wasn't pity, exactly. It was more like resolve mixed with a deep, quiet fury. "Eleanor," he said, leaning forward in his chair, his voice low and intense. "We need to talk about your daughter. We need to talk about what happened while you were unconscious, and then we need to talk about what you're going to do about it." "What do you mean? Where is she?" "Still in Ibiza, as far as I know. Still posting pictures of champagne and sunsets. Still on her very important vacation." Something cold settled in my chest, and it had nothing to do with my damaged heart. "Marcus, what happened?" And then he told me everything. Marcus told me everything, and with each word, I felt something inside me crack open. Not my heart this time, though God knows it felt like it. Something deeper. Something that had been holding together a fiction I'd been telling myself for 32 years. But before I get to that moment, before I tell you about the decision I made in that hospital bed that would change everything, you need to understand how I got here. You need to understand who Eleanor Whitmore was, and more importantly, who Vanessa Whitmore became. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a factory worker and a homemaker. My father ruled our house with an iron fist and a quick temper, and my mother endured it because she had no choice. She'd never worked outside the home, had no education beyond high school, no money of her own, no way to leave. I watched her shrink over the years, watched her become smaller and quieter and more invisible, and I made myself a promise when I was 16 years old. I would never, ever be financially dependent on anyone. I would never be trapped the way she was trapped. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through business school. I graduated with honors and $15,000 in savings that I'd accumulated $1 at a time, sacrificing everything, going without everything, focused on nothing but building a foundation that no one could take away from me. At 28, I started my financial consulting firm with that money and a rented office the size of a closet. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I learned to navigate boardrooms full of men who thought a woman had no business giving financial advice. I smiled through their condescension and proved them wrong with results they couldn't argue with. By the time I was 35, my firm was worth $10 million. By 40, it was worth $50 million. I was too busy building an empire to think about marriage or children. I told myself I didn't need those things, that success was enough, that independence was everything. Then I met Richard at a charity gala when I was 40 years old. He was a professor of literature at Yale, soft-spoken and gentle and completely unlike the aggressive businessmen I usually encountered. He didn't care about my money. He didn't want to manage my company or give me advice I didn't ask for. He just wanted to talk about books and ideas and the life of the mind. He made me laugh. After 6 months, he proposed, and I surprised myself by saying yes. We were happy in our way. Richard understood that my work came first. He had his own career, his own passions. We existed in parallel, two successful people who enjoyed each other's company but never quite merged our lives completely. And then, when I was 43, I started thinking about children, not out of some burning maternal instinct, but because I was building this empire and there was no one to leave it to. Richard was enthusiastic. He'd always wanted to be a father. It took 3 years of fertility treatments, countless doctor's appointments, thousands of dollars, and more disappointment than I care to remember. But finally, at 45 years old, I got pregnant. Vanessa was born 6 weeks premature, tiny and fragile, and I held her in the hospital and felt something I'd never felt before. Not love exactly, though I'm sure that was part of it. More like terror. This small human was completely dependent on me, and I had no idea what to do with that. I went back to work when Vanessa was 6 weeks old. I hired the best nannies money could buy. I enrolled her in the finest preschools. When she was old enough, I sent her to elite private schools, first in Connecticut, then to boarding school in Switzerland when she turned 13. I told myself I was giving her opportunities I never had. I told myself that providing financially was the most important thing a mother could do. I told myself that quality time mattered more than quantity, even though the quality time was sparse and the quantity was almost non-existent. Richard tried to be present, tried to make up for my absences. He took Vanessa to museums and plays. He helped her with homework when she was home from boarding school. He was kind and patient, and everything I wasn't. But he was also passive. He never challenged me about my priorities. He never said, "Eleanor, our daughter needs you, not your money." Maybe he tried once or twice and I shut him down. I don't remember. I was too focused on the next deal, the next acquisition, the next milestone. When Richard died 3 years ago in that stupid yachting accident, something shifted in me. I was 54 years old, worth nearly $200 million after selling my company, and suddenly very aware that I was alone. Vanessa was 29 then, living in London, working at what she called a lifestyle consulting business, but what was really just an excuse to spend the $45,000 a month I deposited into her account. I tried to reach out to her after Richard's funeral. I suggested she move back to Connecticut, stay in the house with me for a while. She came for 2 weeks and spent most of that time on her phone or out with friends she'd known from her boarding school days. When she left, she kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks for everything, Mom. The trust fund transfer went through, right?" I should have seen it then. I should have understood what our relationship had become. But I kept trying. I called her every week. She answered maybe once a month. I sent gifts for her birthday, expensive things I thought she'd like. She thanked me via text. I flew to London to visit her, and she took me shopping at stores where she pointed out things she wanted, and I bought them without question. 6 months ago, I tried something different. She called asking for an increase in her monthly allowance, and I said, "Sweetheart, maybe it's time you thought about doing something productive with your life. You have a degree from Brown. You could do anything you wanted." The explosion was immediate. "Productive? Like you, Mom? Working so much you didn't even notice when Dad and I needed you? Working so much that you missed every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that actually mattered? Yeah, I'll pass on being productive like you." It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, and it gutted me. Because she was right. I had missed everything. I'd been so focused on building financial security that I'd never built emotional security. I'd given her everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. We didn't speak for 3 weeks after that fight. When she finally called, it was to tell me about Dimitri. She'd met him in Mykonos, and he was wonderful and sophisticated and understood her in a way no one else did. She sent me pictures. He was handsome in that generic way that wealthy European men often are, all perfect teeth and designer casual wear. Something about him made me uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything. I'd just gotten my daughter back after 3 weeks of silence. I wasn't going to risk losing her again. I told Marcus about Dimitri, asked him to do a basic background check. Nothing invasive, just the standard things. Marcus came back with concerns about Dimitri's finances, some questionable business dealings, nothing conclusive, but enough to make him uneasy. I thanked Marcus and filed the information away. I didn't confront Vanessa. I told myself I was respecting her privacy, her right to make her own choices. The truth was, I was afraid. Afraid that if I questioned her judgment, she'd cut me off completely, and I'd be left with nothing but my money and my regrets. 2 months ago, Vanessa called to tell me she and Dimitri were in Ibiza for an extended vacation. She was excited, happier than I'd heard her in years. She talked about the beaches and the clubs and the beautiful people. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask about my health or my life or anything that didn't revolve around her and her exciting new existence. I hung up that call and sat in my empty mansion in Greenwich and wondered what the point of it all had been. I'd built an empire. I owned properties worth tens of millions. I had investment portfolios that most people couldn't even comprehend. And I was completely, utterly alone. 3 weeks after that call, I woke up at 3 a.m. with a pain in my chest that felt like death coming to collect what I owed. Now, lying in that hospital bed with Marcus sitting beside me, telling me about Vanessa's response to the news of my heart attack, about her request to guard the will documents, about her inability to interrupt her important vacation, I finally understood the truth I'd been avoiding for 32 years. I hadn't raised a daughter. I'd created a transaction. Every interaction we'd had since she was born had been financial. I gave money, she took it. I sent gifts, she acknowledged them. I provided opportunities, she consumed them. There had never been love in the traditional sense. There had only been economic exchange, and I had taught her that. I had shown her, through every action and every absence, that people were valuable based on what they could provide materially, not emotionally. She had learned the lesson perfectly. And now, when I was dying, when I had nothing to offer but my continued existence or my inheritance, she had chosen the inheritance. She had made the calculation I'd taught her to make. Why interrupt an expensive vacation for someone who was probably going to die anyway? Better to secure the assets and get back to enjoying the life those assets would provide. I looked at Marcus, and he looked back at me with those steady eyes that had seen me through 1,000 business negotiations. But this wasn't business. This was something else entirely. "Marcus," I said, my voice still rough from the breathing tube, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to do it today, while I'm still lucid, while I'm still legally competent to make decisions." "What do you need, Eleanor?" "I need you to rewrite my will." Marcus didn't look surprised. He simply nodded, pulled out his phone, and made a call to his office. Within 2 hours, he had a junior associate at the hospital with a laptop and the necessary legal documents. But before we got to the paperwork, before we started making the changes that would reshape my daughter's future, Marcus told me everything else he'd discovered during those 3 days I'd been unconscious. I need you to understand the full picture before you make any irreversible decisions, he said, settling back into his chair. I know you're angry, Eleanor. I know you're hurt. But you need to hear all of it. He opened a folder on his laptop and turned it toward me. It was Vanessa's Instagram account, and I scrolled through posts from the past week. There she was on a yacht, champagne glass raised, Dimitri's arm around her waist. Another photo of them at what looked like an exclusive restaurant, the kind where you need connections just to get a reservation. A video of her dancing at a beach club, the Mediterranean sparkling behind her. The captions were all variations of the same theme. Living my best life. Blessed beyond measure. Paradise found. Not one word about me. Not one mention of the fact that her mother had nearly died. And in the comments, I could see people asking, friends, acquaintances, people who'd apparently heard through the social network that exists in wealthy circles. Vanessa, I heard about your mom. Is she okay? Thinking of you during this difficult time. Let us know if you need anything. She'd ignored every single one. Or worse, she'd deleted them, because I could see gaps in the comment threads where responses should have been. There's more, Marcus said quietly. He pulled up another document. The investigator I hired did a deep dive on Dimitri. It's worse than I initially thought. I read through the report, and with each paragraph I felt my stomach sink. The debts were even larger than Marcus had first mentioned. 2.3 million euros owed to various investors, some of them with connections to organized crime in Greece. There was a fraud investigation from 3 years ago involving a cryptocurrency scheme that had collapsed, leaving dozens of investors penniless. Dimitri had avoided prosecution, but barely, and only because he'd had expensive lawyers. And then there was the marriage. Svetlana Kovalenko, a Ukrainian woman he'd married in Cyprus 4 years ago, in what was clearly a cash-for-citizenship arrangement. The marriage had never been dissolved. They were still legally married, which meant anything Dimitri entered into with Vanessa would be, at best, legally questionable, and at worst, bigamy. Does Vanessa know about any of this? I asked. I don't think so. The investigator found evidence that Dimitri's been very careful to present himself as a successful entrepreneur. He shows up at the right parties, stays at the right hotels, wears the right clothes. But it's all smoke and mirrors, Eleanor. He's burning through what's left of his family money, and when that runs out, he'll need another source of income. And he thinks that source is my daughter's inheritance. I'm certain of it. The investigator tracked some of his recent communications. He's been talking to lawyers in Greece about marriage laws, about community property, about how to structure assets in a way that would give him access to his wife's inheritance. He's planning this, Eleanor, very carefully. I closed my eyes and tried to process what Marcus was telling me. My daughter, my only child, was being played by a con artist who saw her as nothing more than a path to my money. And Vanessa, who'd grown up with every material advantage, who'd been educated at the finest schools, who should have been able to see through someone like Dimitri, was apparently blind to it all. Or maybe she didn't care. Maybe she thought love and financial security were the same thing, because that's what I'd taught her. There's something else, Marcus said, and his voice had changed. It was softer now, almost gentle. Dr. Mehta asked me to share this with you. During the surgery, when they had you on the table, there was a moment when they thought they were going to lose you. Your heart stopped for 42 seconds. They had to use the defibrillator twice to bring you back. I stared at him. I died? Technically, yes. For 42 seconds, you were gone. Dr. Mehta said it was touch and go for several minutes after that. He described it as a miracle that you're here right now, talking to me, capable of making decisions. A miracle. I'd come that close to dying, and my daughter had been drinking champagne on a beach in Ibiza, too busy enjoying her vacation to even acknowledge what was happening. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Marcus leaned forward. Eleanor, I've been your lawyer for 15 years. I've seen you negotiate deals that would make other people's heads spin. I've watched you build something extraordinary from nothing. But I've also watched you with Vanessa, and I need to say something that might be difficult to hear. Say it. You didn't fail as a mother because you worked hard or because you built a successful business. You failed because you never showed Vanessa that she mattered more than the business. Every time she needed you and you weren't there, you sent money instead of showing up. Every time she wanted your time and you gave her things, you taught her that love and money were interchangeable. You created this, Eleanor. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but you created it nonetheless. The words should have hurt, but they didn't. They were simply true, and I'd lived long enough to appreciate truth when I heard it, even when it was uncomfortable. I know, I said quietly. I've known for a long time, actually. I just didn't want to admit it because if I admitted it, I'd have to face the fact that I sacrificed the most important relationship in my life for something that ultimately doesn't matter at all. It's not too late to try to fix it. Yes, Marcus, it is. Because the woman who would have been receptive to fixing it died 3 days ago when she got a phone call telling her I was dying and decided her vacation was more important. That's not fixable. That's fundamental. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "So what do you want to do?" I looked at him, and I felt something settle into place inside me. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was the near-death experience. Maybe it was finally seeing the truth of my relationship with Vanessa without any illusions to soften it. Maybe it was just exhaustion with pretending that things were anything other than what they were. I want to rewrite my will. I want to make sure that the money I worked so hard for goes to something that actually matters, and I want to make sure Vanessa understands that there are consequences for the choices she's made. Marcus nodded slowly. All right, let's talk about what that looks like. We spent the next 3 hours going through every detail of my estate. Marcus had brought all the necessary documents, and his associate took notes as we worked through the changes. It was complicated, more complicated than I'd anticipated, because when you have $220 million, you can't just write a simple will and be done with it. There were properties, investment portfolios, business interests, charitable trusts, all of it interconnected in ways that required careful legal navigation. But the core of it was simple. I was taking Vanessa out as my primary beneficiary. I want to create a foundation, I told Marcus, in memory of my sister Claire. She died of cancer when she was 45, left behind 3 children who were teenagers at the time. She was everything I wasn't, Marcus. She was warm and present and loving. Her kids adored her because she actually showed up for them. I want to honor that. What kind of foundation? Support for single mothers dealing with cancer, financial assistance, childcare, medical bills, whatever they need to focus on treatment and time with their children. 85% of my estate. That's $187 million. Marcus typed notes into his laptop. And the remaining 15%? For Vanessa, but not as a lump sum. A trust with strict controls. $5,000 a month until she turns 40, at which point she gets the remainder. And the apartment in New York. That's it. Total value around $18 million. That's still a significant inheritance, Eleanor. Most people would be thrilled with $18 million. I know, but it's not the $200 million she's expecting. It's not enough to fund the lifestyle she thinks she's entitled to. It's not enough for Dmitri to sink his claws into and drain away. It's enough for her to live comfortably if she manages it wisely. But it's not enough for her to never have to think about consequences. She's going to be furious. Good. Maybe fury will wake her up to reality in a way nothing else has. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. You're sure about this? Once we put this in place and you sign it, it's going to be very difficult to undo. Vanessa will have legal grounds to contest it, of course, but given the circumstances and the fact that you're clearly of sound mind, I don't think she'd be successful. But Eleanor, she's your daughter, your only child. And she made a choice, Marcus. When Dr. Mehta called her and told her I was dying, she had a choice. She could have said, I'll get on the next flight. I'll be there as soon as I can. She could have said, I'm scared. I love my mother. I need to be there. She could have said anything that showed even a shred of human decency or concern. Instead, she asked about my will and went back to her vacation. I felt my voice crack slightly, and I paused to compose myself. Marcus handed me a tissue, and I wiped my eyes, angry at myself for the tears. I'd built an empire without crying. I could certainly dismantle an inheritance without falling apart. I'm not doing this out of spite, I continued. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. That money represents decades of my life, of my work, of my sacrifice. I'm not going to let it fund someone who sees me as nothing more than a bank account. I'm not going to let it fall into the hands of a con artist like Dimitri. And I'm not going to pretend that blood relation alone entitles someone to everything I've built. What about trying to talk to her first, giving her a chance to explain? Explain what, Marcus? There's no explanation that makes what she did acceptable. Sorry, Mom. I know you were dying, but the weather was really nice in Ibiza? No. She showed me who she is. I'm choosing to believe her. Marcus nodded and turned back to his laptop. Over the next hour, we hammered out the details. The foundation would be managed by a board of trustees, with Marcus as the initial chair. The mission would be specifically focused on supporting mothers with cancer, particularly those with children under 18. There would be grants for medical expenses, living costs, childcare, anything that would allow these women to focus on fighting for their lives and spending time with their children instead of worrying about how to pay the bills. For Vanessa's trust, we built in strict controls. $5,000 a month distributed automatically. No access to the principal until age 40. No borrowing against it. No using it as collateral. If she died before 40, the remainder would go to the foundation. It was designed to provide support without enabling the kind of reckless spending I'd been funding for years. The New York apartment was hers outright. It was worth about $3 million, and she could sell it if she wanted, though I suspected she wouldn't. It was a beautiful place in Tribeca, and she'd always loved staying there when she visited the city. What about personal items? Marcus asked. Jewelry, art, furniture? The jewelry goes to the foundation. They can auction it to raise additional funds. The art, same thing. Most of the furniture can be sold with the house. I'll keep the house on the market posthumously, and the proceeds go to the foundation. Vanessa can have her father's books if she wants them. Richard would have wanted her to have those. And there are some photo albums in the library, pictures from when she was young. She can have those too. That's generous, given everything. It's not about being generous or punitive, Marcus. It's about being clear. She gets enough to live comfortably if she's smart about it. She gets some connection to her father's memory. But she doesn't get to treat me like an ATM and then inherit everything when I die. Those days are over. By the time we finished, it was early evening. Dr. Mehta came in to check on me, pleased with my progress but concerned about my stress levels. I assured him I was fine, that handling my affairs was actually making me feel better, more in control. He adjusted my medications and left with instructions to rest. Marcus gathered up all the documents. I'll have these finalized and brought back tomorrow for your signature. We'll need 2 witnesses who aren't beneficiaries, which won't be a problem. The hospital staff can serve as witnesses. Once you sign, I'll file everything appropriately, and your new estate plan will be in effect. Thank you, Marcus, for everything, for being here, for not judging me, for helping me do what needs to be done. Eleanor, you've been more than a client to me over the years. You've been a friend. I hate what Vanessa's done to you. I hate that you're in this position. But I respect your decision, and I'll make sure it's executed perfectly. After he left, I lay in that hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. The pain in my chest was manageable now, reduced to a dull ache by the medications. But there was another pain, one that no drug could touch. The pain of accepting that my relationship with my daughter was irreparably broken. The pain of knowing that I'd contributed to that breaking. The pain of choosing to move forward anyway, without illusions, without false hope, without pretending that love and money were the same thing. My phone was on the rolling table beside the bed. I picked it up and opened it, scrolling through my messages. There were dozens from colleagues, friends, acquaintances, people checking on me, offering support, sending wishes for my recovery. I scrolled through all of them, and there wasn't a single one from Vanessa. I opened Instagram, something I rarely did, and looked at her account again. She'd posted a new photo just an hour ago. Her and Dimitri at sunset, the sky painted in brilliant oranges and pinks behind them. The caption read, "Every ending is a new beginning. Grateful for this life. Every ending is a new beginning." I almost laughed at the irony. She had no idea how true that was about to become. No idea that while she was posting inspirational captions about gratitude and new beginnings, her mother was systematically dismantling the future she'd assumed was hers by right. I put the phone down and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I would sign the documents. Tomorrow I would make it official. But tonight I would allow myself this one moment of grief. Not for the money, not for the estate, but for the daughter I'd never really had and the mother I'd never managed to be. When the nurse came in an hour later to check my vitals, she found me asleep, tears still wet on my cheeks. I signed the documents the next morning. Marcus arrived at 9 with 2 hospital administrators who served as witnesses. The whole process took less than 30 minutes. My signature on those pages was steady, clear, legally binding. I felt nothing as I wrote my name. No regret, no second thoughts, no dramatic surge of maternal guilt. Just a quiet sense of finality, like closing a book I'd been reading for too long. Marcus collected the signed documents, placed them carefully in his briefcase, and looked at me with something like concern. "Eleanor, have you thought about when you're going to tell Vanessa?" "I'm not going to tell her, not yet." He raised his eyebrows. "You're going to let her find out when you die?" "No. I'm going to let her show me who she really is first. Without the pressure of knowing her inheritance is at stake. I want to see if she reaches out. I want to see if there's any genuine concern underneath all that entitlement." Marcus sat down in the chair beside my bed. "That's a test, Eleanor. You're testing your daughter. I'm giving her an opportunity. There's a difference. If she calls, if she shows even the smallest amount of concern or remorse, then maybe we can have a conversation. Maybe there's something to salvage. But if she doesn't, if she continues to post vacation photos and ignore the fact that her mother nearly died, then I'll know for certain that I made the right choice. And if she doesn't call, are you going to be able to live with that?" I thought about his question for a long moment. "Marcus, I've lived with a lot of things. I lived with the guilt of not being there for Vanessa when she was growing up. I lived with the loneliness of a marriage that was comfortable but never deep. I lived with the knowledge that I'd built an empire at the expense of everything else. One more thing won't break me. I'm harder than that. Maybe too hard." "You're not hard, Eleanor. You're hurt. There's a difference." After Marcus left, I spent the day recovering. Dr. Mehta was pleased with my progress and said I'd probably be released in another 3 or 4 days if everything continued to improve. Physical therapy came by to help me walk the corridors. Nurses checked my vitals every few hours. It was all very routine, very medical, very focused on the mechanics of keeping my damaged heart beating. But my mind was elsewhere. I kept checking my phone, expecting to see something from Vanessa. A text, a call, even a perfunctory message asking how I was doing. Nothing came. On the 3rd day after I'd signed the documents, my phone finally rang with Vanessa's number. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering, my heart rate picking up enough that the monitor beside my bed beeped a warning. "Hello, Vanessa." "Mom! Oh my God, I just heard you had some kind of health scare. Are you okay? Why didn't anyone tell me?" The casual tone, the manufactured concern, the outright lie about not knowing. It all hit me like a physical blow. I kept my voice carefully neutral. "Dr. Mehta called you 4 days ago, Vanessa. He told you I had a massive heart attack and was in a coma with less than 2 hours to live." There was a pause. I could practically hear her recalculating, trying to figure out how much I knew. "Oh, that." "Yeah," he called. "But Mom, you have to understand. I was in the middle of this really important vacation with Dmitri. We'd planned it for months. And the doctor made it sound like there was nothing I could do anyway, like you were basically already gone, so what was the point of rushing back? Besides, you're obviously fine now, right? So it all worked out." Something cold and clear settled over me. This was it. This was the moment Marcus had been talking about. The moment where I could either accept the truth of who my daughter was or continue living in denial. "Vanessa, do you remember what you told Dr. Mehta when he called?" Another pause, longer this time. "Not really. I was pretty out of it. We'd been at this beach club, and you know how it is. You told him to make sure someone guarded the documents for my will. You gave him the password to my safe. You asked if there was anything else he needed, and then you hung up to get back to your friends." Silence. Complete silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost see her trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make it sound less monstrous than it was. "Mom, I was in shock. People say weird things when they're in shock. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were thinking very clearly, Vanessa. You were thinking about money, about inheritance, about making sure your financial future was secure before you went back to your champagne and your sunset photos. That's not fair. You don't understand what it was like getting that call. I panicked. You panicked about the wrong things. A daughter who loves her mother panics about getting to the hospital, about being there, about saying goodbye if it comes to that. She doesn't panic about securing estate documents. So what, you're going to punish me now? Is that what this is? You're going to lecture me about not being the perfect daughter when you were never there for me in the first place?" And there it was. The truth underneath all the surface pleasantries, the resentment that had been building for 32 years, finally coming out into the open. "You're right," I said quietly. "I wasn't there for you. I failed you as a mother in fundamental ways. I chose work over you, money over connection, success over presence. I own that, Vanessa. I've known it for years. But here's what you need to understand. My failures as a mother don't excuse your choices as a daughter. They don't excuse the fact that when I was dying, you asked about money instead of getting on a plane. They don't excuse the fact that you're still in Europe, posting vacation photos, while I'm in a hospital bed recovering from a heart attack that nearly killed me. What do you want from me, Mom? You want me to apologize? Fine, I'm sorry. Is that what you need to hear? No, Vanessa. I don't need anything from you anymore. That's what I'm trying to tell you. For 32 years, I've been trying to buy your love with money, and you've been perfectly happy to take the money without giving the love. We've both been complicit in this transactional relationship. But I'm done with it now. I'm done pretending that we have something we don't have. What does that mean? It means we need to have a very honest conversation about your expectations and my intentions. But not now. Not over the phone while you're still on vacation in Europe. When you come back to the States, when you decide that your mother is worth more than a phone call from a beach club, then we'll talk. Are you threatening me? No, I'm being clear. Maybe for the first time in your life. I'm being clear about what I expect and what you can expect from me. And right now, what you can expect is exactly what you've given me. Distance. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, and the monitor beside my bed was beeping more insistently now. A nurse rushed in, concerned about my elevated heart rate. I waved her off, took deep breaths, and forced myself to calm down. It was done. I'd given Vanessa her chance, and she'd confirmed everything I already knew. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication, no room for doubt. My daughter saw me as a bank account first and a human being second, if at all. And now she knew that I knew. The only question that remained was what she would do with that information. Vanessa called back 17 times over the next 2 hours. I didn't answer. Each call went to voicemail, and each voicemail became progressively more frantic. The first few were angry, accusing me of being manipulative and cruel. Then they shifted to confused, asking what I meant by my cryptic statements. By the 10th call, there were tears in her voice. By the 17th, there was something close to panic. I listened to none of them. Dr. Mehta had been clear about avoiding stress, and engaging with Vanessa's hysteria would accomplish nothing except raising my blood pressure. Instead, I focused on my recovery. I walked the hospital corridors. I ate the bland, cardiac-friendly meals they brought me. I read the book Marcus had thoughtfully left on my bedside table. I did everything in my power to project calm, even as my daughter imploded across the Atlantic Ocean. Marcus came to visit on the evening of that same day. He took one look at my face and said, "You talked to her." She called. Finally. 10 days after I nearly died, she called. And she confirmed everything we already knew. She tried to play it off as shock, as not understanding what she was saying, as being confused. Then when I didn't buy that, she got angry, accused me of trying to punish her, threw my failures as a mother in my face, which, to be fair, is accurate. Then I told her we needed to have an honest conversation when she came back to the States, and I hung up. Marcus sat down heavily. How did she take that? She's called 17 times since then. I haven't answered. I assume she's spiraling. Eleanor, you need to be prepared for what comes next. When Vanessa realizes you're serious, when she understands that her financial future might be at stake, she's going to do whatever it takes to secure her position. That might mean coming back to the States. It might mean bringing Dimitri with her. It might mean lawyers. Let her bring lawyers. The documents are airtight, and I was clearly of sound mind when I signed them. You made sure of that. Sound mind legally, yes. But Vanessa could argue undue influence, coercion, that you were making emotional decisions while recovering from a traumatic medical event. It would be a weak case, but she could make it. I looked at Marcus steadily. Then we'll deal with it. But I'm not backing down, not this time. The next morning, I received a text from Vanessa. Just one line. Dimitri and I are flying back today. We'll be at the house tomorrow afternoon. So she was bringing him. Interesting. I'd expected her to come alone, to try to manipulate me through tears and apologies. The fact that she was bringing Dimitri suggested she either needed emotional support or, more likely, he'd insisted on coming to protect his investment. I forwarded the text to Marcus with a simple message. Be at the house tomorrow at 2 p.m. Marcus responded immediately. I'll be there. Are you sure you're ready for this? I wasn't sure about anything except that this conversation needed to happen. I needed to look my daughter in the eye and tell her exactly what I'd done and why. I needed to see her face when she realized that her financial safety net had just been cut to a fraction of what she'd assumed it would be. And I needed to do it while I was still strong enough, still clear enough, still certain enough that I wouldn't back down when she cried or raged or tried to guilt me into changing my mind. Dr. Mehta released me from the hospital that afternoon. I was stable, healing well, and with the right medications and lifestyle changes, he said I could expect to live for many more years. He gave me strict instructions about diet, exercise, stress management, and regular follow-up appointments. He also looked at me with those kind, knowing eyes and said, Mrs. Whitmore, whatever you're planning, whatever conflict you're walking into, please remember that your heart is still fragile, not just physically. Take care of yourself. I thanked him and meant it. This man had saved my life, had been horrified by my daughter's response, had treated me with more compassion in 5 days than Vanessa had shown in 32 years. I made a mental note to make a significant donation to his cardiac research program through the foundation. The house felt different when I returned. Or maybe I was different. I walked through rooms filled with expensive furniture and art collected over decades, and all of it felt hollow. This mansion in Greenwich, this symbol of everything I'd achieved, suddenly seemed like exactly what it was, a monument to misplaced priorities. I spent that evening preparing for the next day's confrontation. I laid out all the relevant documents on the dining room table. The new will, the the foundation paperwork, the trust documents for Vanessa's reduced inheritance, the investigator's report on Dimitri. I wanted everything visible, everything clear. No room for misunderstanding or manipulation. Marcus arrived at 1:30 the next afternoon. He did a quick review of the documents, made sure everything was in order, and then sat with me in the living room to wait. I'd made coffee, more for something to do with my hands than because either of us wanted it. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Surprisingly calm. I thought I'd be nervous, but I'm not. I'm just ready for this to be over. It might get ugly, Eleanor. Vanessa's going to be desperate when she realizes what you've done. And Dimitri, if he's the con artist we think he is, might try to escalate things in ways you're not expecting. Then it gets ugly. I've survived worse. At exactly 2 p.m., I heard a car in the driveway. I stood and walked to the window. It was a Blacktown car, probably hired from the airport. The driver got out and opened the rear door. Vanessa emerged first, looking polished and put together despite the overnight flight. She was wearing designer clothes, perfect makeup, hair styled precisely. Every inch the wealthy heiress. Then Dimitri stepped out, and I got my first in-person look at the man who'd been planning to marry my daughter for her money. He was handsome in that Mediterranean way, all white teeth and expensive sunglasses, wearing casual clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He put his arm around Vanessa's waist possessively as they walked toward the house. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Vanessa's eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting she'd been crying on the plane, but her expression was hard, determined. "Mom," she said, her voice tight. "Vanessa, Dimitri, please come in." They followed me into the living room where Marcus was waiting. Vanessa's eyes narrowed when she saw him. "Why is your lawyer here?" "Because this is a legal conversation as much as a personal one. Sit down, please." Dimitri helped Vanessa into a chair with exaggerated solicitousness, then sat beside her, his hand finding hers immediately. The gesture was clearly calculated to show unity, to present them as a team against me. I almost felt sorry for Vanessa. She had no idea she was being played. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening," Vanessa started, her voice taking on that wheedling quality I recognized from her childhood. "I know you're upset about what happened when you were sick, but I explained that. I was in shock. I didn't know what I was saying. You can't honestly believe that I didn't care about you." "Can't I? You've called me exactly once in the 10 days since I nearly died. You posted vacation photos while I was in the ICU. You brought your boyfriend to this conversation instead of coming alone to talk to your mother. Every action you've taken has been about protecting yourself, not about concern for me. That's not fair. Dimitri is my partner. He supports me. I wanted him here for emotional support." "I'm sure you did. Dimitri, I wonder if you'd mind stepping into the other room for a few minutes? This is really a conversation that needs to happen between Vanessa and me." Dimitri's grip on Vanessa's hand tightened. "I think I should stay. Vanessa wants me here. And I want you to leave. This is my house, and you're not part of this family. Not yet, anyway, though we should probably talk about that later." Something flickered in Dimitri's eyes. Wariness. He stood slowly. "Of course. I'll wait in the foyer." After he left, Vanessa turned on me with sudden fury. "How dare you treat him like that? He's been nothing but supportive through all of this." "All of what, Vanessa? All of the stress of your mother nearly dying? Or all of the stress of potentially losing access to $220 million? She flinched like I'd slapped her. "That's a horrible thing to say." "It's an honest thing to say. Let me be very clear with you. I know exactly who Dimitri is. I know about his debts. I know about his failed business ventures. I know about Svetlana Kovalenko, his wife in Cyprus, the one he's still legally married to. I know everything, Vanessa. And the fact that you don't tells me everything I need to know about how much he respects you." Vanessa's face went pale. "That's not true. Dimitri doesn't have a wife. He would have told me." Marcus slid a folder across the coffee table toward her. "Marriage certificate, filed in Cyprus 4 years ago, never dissolved. There are photos in there as well, if you'd like to see them. Vanessa opened the folder with shaking hands. I watched her face as she looked through the documents, watched the realization dawn, watched her world start to crumble. When she looked up, there were tears streaming down her face. You're lying. You hired someone to fake these documents because you don't want me to be happy. Vanessa, I've spent 32 years trying to make you happy. I gave you everything money could buy, but I never taught you how to recognize when someone was using you, because I never taught you that people could have value beyond what they could provide financially. That was my failure. But what happens next is your choice. She stood abruptly, the folder falling to the floor, photos of Dmitri and Svetlana scattering across the carpet. I need to talk to him. I need to hear his side of this. By all means, go talk to him. See what lies he comes up with. But Vanessa, before you do, you need to understand something. I've changed my will. She froze halfway to the door. What? I signed new estate documents 4 days ago. 85% of my assets, approximately $187 million, are going to a foundation I've created in memory of my sister Claire. The foundation will support mothers with cancer who are trying to care for their children while fighting for their lives. Vanessa turned slowly. Her face had gone from pale to flushed, rage and panic fighting for dominance in her expression. You can't do that. I already did. Marcus has the signed documents. Everything is filed and legal. What about me? I'm your daughter. I'm your only child. You get $18 million, $15 million in a trust that pays out $5,000 a month until you turn 40, at which point you receive the remainder, and the apartment in New York. It's yours outright. The silence that followed was absolute. I could see Vanessa trying to process what I'd just said, trying to reconcile the life she'd imagined with the reality I was presenting. $5,000 a month? Are you insane? I can't live on that. Millions of people live on far less. You'll manage, or you'll get a job. Either way, you'll learn what it means to actually work for something, instead of just expecting it to appear in your bank account. This is because of what I said to that doctor, isn't it? You're punishing me for one mistake. No, Vanessa. I'm responding to 32 years of mistakes, mine and yours. I'm responding to the fact that when I was dying, your first thought was about money. I'm responding to the 10 days you spent posting vacation photos while I recovered from a heart attack. I'm responding to the fact that you're standing in front of me right now, more concerned about your inheritance than about the fact that your mother nearly died. This isn't punishment. This is reality. She started to cry, deep sobbing that shook her whole body. Mom, please, you can't do this. Dmitri and I have plans. We're going to get married. We were going to buy a house in Greece. You can't just take that away from me. Dmitri is already married. And any plans you've made based on inheriting my entire estate need to be revised. I'm not taking anything away from you, Vanessa. I'm giving you exactly what you've earned through your actions. What about everything I've been through? What about growing up without a mother because you were always working? Don't I deserve something for that? You deserved a mother who was present. You deserved time and attention and emotional support. I didn't give you those things, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But that doesn't mean you're entitled to every dollar I earned through the work you resent so much. You can't have it both ways, Vanessa. You can't blame me for working while also expecting to inherit everything that work produced. She looked at Marcus desperately. This isn't legal. She was sick. She was on medications. You can challenge this. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. Your mother was completely lucid when she signed these documents. I had her examined by a psychiatrist who confirmed her mental capacity. 2 hospital administrators witnessed the signing. Everything was done according to proper legal procedure. You could contest it, but you wouldn't win. Vanessa's sobs intensified. She sank back into the chair, her face in her hands, her whole body shaking. For a moment, just a moment, I felt my resolve waver. She was my daughter. my only child. The little girl I'd held in the hospital 32 years ago, so tiny and fragile and completely dependent on me. But then she looked up, and the expression on her face wasn't grief. It was calculation. I could see her thinking, planning, trying to figure out her next move. "What if I change?" she said, her voice suddenly soft, suddenly the little girl voice she'd used as a child when she wanted something. "What if I prove to you that I can be better? That I do care about you, not just your money? Would you reconsider?" And there it was, still transactional, still trying to negotiate, still unable to see that the problem wasn't about proving anything. It was about fundamentally not understanding what it meant to love someone without conditions. "Vanessa, if you change, if you genuinely become a different person, then you'll be fine with $5,000 a month because you'll have found value in things that don't cost money. And if you don't change, then I've done you a favor by not enabling you to waste the rest of your life pursuing the hollow existence I modeled for you." She stood again, wiping her face, her expression hardening. "Fine. You want to cut me off? Cut me off. But don't expect me to come running back when you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you. Don't expect me to be there for you when you're dying for real next time." The words should have hurt. Maybe they would have, a week ago. But now they just sounded like confirmation of everything I already knew. "I don't expect anything from you, Vanessa. Not anymore. And that's actually a relief." She turned and walked out of the room. I heard her in the foyer, heard raised voices as she confronted Dmitri about the marriage certificate. Heard him trying to explain, making excuses, saying it was complicated, it didn't mean anything. Heard her screaming at him, heard something break, heard the front door slam. Then there was silence. Marcus and I sat in that silence for a long moment before he spoke. "Are you all right?" I thought about his question. Was I all right? My daughter hated me. My only child had just walked out of my life, possibly forever. I just guaranteed that the fortune I'd spent decades building would go to strangers instead of family. By any conventional measure, this should have felt like failure. But instead, I felt free. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I actually am." The house was quiet after they left. Marcus stayed for another hour, making sure I was stable, making sure I wasn't going to collapse from the stress of the confrontation. But I was fine. Better than fine, actually. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without the weight of unspoken resentments and unmet expectations crushing my chest. "What happens now?" Marcus asked before he left. "Now I figure out what the rest of my life looks like. I have a second chance, Marcus. Not many people get that. I died for 42 seconds on that operating table, and somehow I came back. I'm not going to waste whatever time I have left pretending that toxic relationships are better than no relationship at all." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The foundation paperwork will be finalized within the week. I'll need you to come to the office to sign a few more documents, but after that, it's done. The Claire Whitmore Foundation will be operational, and we can start accepting applications for assistance." After Marcus left, I walked through my house, really looked at it for the first time in years. 8 bedrooms for one person. Formal dining room that hadn't hosted a dinner party in over a decade. Living room with furniture chosen by an interior decorator because I'd been too busy to care about such details. This wasn't a home. It was a museum dedicated to success that ultimately meant nothing. I called a real estate agent the next day and put the house on the market. The agent was thrilled. Greenwich properties in this price range didn't come available often. She estimated it would sell for somewhere between 12 and 15 million, every penny of which would go to the foundation. I started looking at smaller places, condos in the city, maybe something in Boston near the harbor, places designed for living, not impressing. Places where I could watch sunrises and read books and maybe, eventually, figure out who Eleanor Whitmore was when she wasn't building empires or failing as a mother. The first 3 months after that confrontation, I heard nothing from Vanessa. Not a call, not a text, not even an angry email. I assumed she was with Dmitri, trying to salvage whatever relationship they'd had once she'd confronted him about his secret wife. Or maybe she'd left him and was trying to figure out how to survive on $5,000 a month, a fraction of what she'd been accustomed to spending. I didn't reach out. I'd said what needed to be said, and anything more would just be reopening wounds that needed to heal, if they ever could. The foundation launched 4 months after my heart attack. We held a small ceremony at a hotel in Manhattan. Marcus gave a speech about my sister Claire, about her warmth and her love for her children, about how this foundation would honor her memory by helping other mothers have the time with their children that cancer had stolen from her. I spoke briefly, keeping my remarks focused on the mission rather than on my personal situation. Several cardiac surgeons attended, including Dr. Mehta, who'd become a supporter of the foundation's work. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of doctors, social workers, and cancer advocates, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose that wasn't tied to profit margins or quarterly earnings. Connection to something larger than my own success. The knowledge that the money I'd spent decades accumulating would actually help people instead of just sitting in accounts or funding my daughter's shopping habits. We received our first applications within days of launching. Single mothers dealing with stage 3 breast cancer while trying to care for children. Widows fighting ovarian cancer while raising teenagers alone. Women who'd been given months to live and were terrified about what would happen to their kids. The foundation provided financial assistance for medical bills, rent, groceries, childcare, whatever they needed to focus on fighting for their lives and spending time with their families. It was the best thing I'd ever done with my money. Better than any deal I'd ever closed or company I'd ever built. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter, 10 pages long, postmarked from New York City. I stared at Vanessa's handwriting on the envelope for a long time before opening it. Part of me didn't want to read it, didn't want to risk the fragile peace I'd found. But another part of me, the part that was still her mother despite everything, needed to know. The letter was raw and honest in a way Vanessa had never been before. She wrote about confronting Dmitri, about discovering that everything I'd told her was true, about him admitting that he'd targeted her specifically because of her inheritance, that he'd planned to marry her quickly and then find ways to access the money. She'd ended things immediately and returned to New York alone. She wrote about trying to live on $5,000 a month, about how terrifying it had been at first, about the panic attacks she'd had when she realized she couldn't just buy her way through problems anymore. She'd gotten a job, a real job, working at an art gallery in Chelsea. It paid $4,000 a month, barely enough to cover her expenses even with the trust fund supplement. She wrote about starting therapy 3 times a week, working through decades of resentment and entitlement and the fundamental emptiness of a life built entirely around consumption. Her therapist had helped her understand that my failures as a mother didn't excuse her failures as a daughter, that we'd both contributed to the toxic dynamic between us. And then, at the end of the letter, she wrote something that made me cry for the first time since the confrontation. "Mom, I'm not writing this to ask you to change the will. I'm not writing this to try to get more money or manipulate you into feeling sorry for me. I'm writing this because I need you to know that you were right. About everything. About me. About Dmitri. About the way I've wasted my life. I was cruel to you when you were dying, and no amount of therapy or self-reflection will ever make that okay. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. Not for money. Not for inheritance. Just because I finally understand that the person I was is not someone I want to be anymore. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to try to have a relationship with you again. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. And I'm grateful that you survived that heart attack, even though my first reaction when I heard about it was the worst moment of my life. I have a lot to make up for, and I don't know if I ever can. But I'm going to try. Your daughter, Vanessa. P.S. I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. It wasn't planned. The father is Dmitri, but he doesn't know, and I'm not going to tell him. I'm going to do this alone. And I'm terrified that I'm going to be as bad at being a mother as you think you were. But I'm going to try to be better. For this baby. And maybe, eventually, for us. I read that letter 3 times, sitting in my new condo overlooking Boston Harbor, tears streaming down my face. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? For Vanessa to understand, to take responsibility, to change. But now that it was happening, I didn't know what to do with it. I called Marcus. She wrote to me, "Vanessa, she's pregnant. She's working a real job. She's in therapy. She's apologizing." What are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to believe her, wants to think that this is real change and not just another manipulation. But part of me is afraid to hope. Eleanor, you don't have to make any decisions right now. You don't have to respond immediately. Take your time. Figure out what you want, not what you think you should want. I thought about that advice for 2 months before I finally responded to Vanessa's letter. I invited her to lunch, neutral territory, a restaurant in Manhattan, where we could talk without the baggage of my house or her apartment. She arrived on time, dressed simply, none of the designer labels I'd grown accustomed to seeing her wear. She was showing now, just slightly, and she looked different. Not just physically, but in her eyes. There was something there that hadn't been before. Humility, maybe, or just exhaustion from finally facing reality. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about the will. We talked about her pregnancy, about her job, about her therapy sessions. We talked about my sister Claire, about what kind of mother she'd been, about what Vanessa remembered from the few times they'd spent time together before Claire died. It wasn't easy. There were long silences, moments where the weight of everything unsaid threatened to crush the fragile connection we were trying to rebuild. But we got through lunch, and at the end, when she stood to leave, she hugged me. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "Thank you for giving me a chance." "This doesn't fix everything," I told her. "This doesn't undo what happened, but it's a start." "I know, and a start is more than I deserve." I watched her leave the restaurant, one hand unconsciously resting on her small belly, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could build something real between us, not based on money or obligation, but on genuine connection and hard-won understanding. The will stays as it is. The foundation continues its work. Vanessa lives on her $5,000 a month and her gallery salary. But we meet for lunch once a month now. We talk on the phone occasionally. When her baby is born, a little girl she names Claire, I'm there at the hospital. Not as the wealthy grandmother with unlimited resources, but just as Eleanor. Just as someone who wants to be present for the people she loves, finally understanding that presence is the only thing that truly matters. I didn't die that night when my heart stopped for 42 seconds. But the version of myself who'd spent a lifetime confusing money with love, success with connection, providing with presence, she did die. And what came back, what survived, was someone better. Someone who understood that the only legacy that matters is the one you leave in people's hearts, not in their bank accounts. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 57 years old. I built an empire and nearly lost everything that mattered. But I got a second chance, and this time I'm not going to waste it.